Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. It is the weekend edition. We are so grateful that you can join us. And, of course, it's the middle of March Madness, so we'll talk about that maybe briefly. But there's a lot of madness right now in terms of what is before the Supreme Court, in terms of an individual that might be confirmed to the Supreme Court. So we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about that. We probably will back our way into some of the other issues in the news, which will be certainly Ukraine, as well as a couple of things happening in Congress and even some controversy in the state of Florida about whether or not we can actually indoctrinate young children. And I'm talking about anywhere from 5-year-old to 8-year-olds in terms of sexuality. But first of all, let me go around the roundtable. Of course, our good friend Kelly Shackelford with us, and Keisha Russell, who I ran into at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. And we are thrilled that both of you from First Liberty are sitting across from us today.
We're looking forward to it.
First article that I've posted is the one I get the question on most. I'm sure you do as well. I don't know what it is, but Coach Kennedy has resonated with more people than anyone else. And now you have a case that you will now actually argue before the Supreme Court.
Yeah, we finally got a date. We've been really waiting. And, you know, the court, they end their term in June. So the last week in June, the most controversial decisions will be released. The abortion decision, the Second Amendment decision, and probably the Coach Kennedy, because they just set it for oral argument. I mean, the last oral argument of the term is the week of the 25th through the 27th. That's those 3 days. Well, they just told us our argument is on the 25th, so we're right at the end. But it's so significant for so many reasons. I mean, I think number one, I think people are shocked to learn that there's never been a Supreme Court decision on either teachers or coaches and their religious freedoms. So this is going to be really significant. The other thing is, this case arrives in such a good way. What Coach Kennedy did, I think everybody understands it's wrong to fire somebody because they went to a knee to say a prayer by themselves after the game. And the Ninth Circuit, which was hostile to that, had 11 judges dissent. So that was a pretty good setup, and I think the court had already kind of said they were very disturbed by what they saw below. So, I mean, hopefully we're about to get a really good decision that's going to be great for every teacher, for every coach, really for everybody who works in any government, because the argument that they've been making is that the reason Coach Kennedy can't pray is because he's on duty as a government official. Mm-hmm. And if that's true, then, I mean, how many government officials are out there right now in their job? They're not allowed to pray over their meal. They're not allowed to say anything about their faith. I mean, this would be a massive stripping of religious freedom. So the opposite of this is we're going to get a decision saying, no, they're protected in these things, which will be a great precedent to begin protecting people around the country, whether they're coaches or teachers or they just work for the government. So it's a great opportunity. I would encourage people to pray. It's going to be argued the 25th. But what will happen then is on the 29th, which is that Friday, or maybe even that Wednesday, but probably that Friday, they will go into a room, the 9 justices by themselves, vote, and they will start writing the opinion. Mm-hmm. And that's got to be done by the end of June. So it's going to be quick. And so it's a great time to pray. And of course, Coach Kennedy's been waiting for almost 7 years to get back on the field.
Unfortunate. Yeah.
So we're hoping that at the end of this, there'll be a media throng when he walks back on that field as a coach.
Keisha, I want to come to you. I think, if I remember right, you've been a teacher, so you certainly have a way of looking at this both as a lawyer and a teacher. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for the court to just make it clear that teachers do have First Amendment rights, and that it's not right to send the impression that students are not allowed to see their teachers or their coaches or people in authority exercising their religious faith. It's a regular part of American culture, and we should be demonstrating that to students, showing them that it's perfectly okay to have religious expression in the public square.
I just don't want to get too much into the deep weeds, but it does seem to me that this also has a possibility of addressing the issue of free exercise. You know, the First Amendment talks about free exercise and establishment of religion. It seems like most of these cases, religious liberty cases, are establishment because the free exercise was changed by a case that came out of Oregon called the Smith decision, right?
Yeah, definitely. Smith just basically said that as long as the law is neutral, that the government is essentially allowed to violate your religious beliefs. And so Smith is a really dangerous case and a really dangerous precedent, and we're hoping that the Supreme Court will at least address that case in Coach Kennedy's case.
Yeah, this is an unusual case in that it's both. I mean, we are arguing, and I think rightly so, and I think the court's going to rule this way, that this violates Coach Kennedy's free exercise of religion. It also violates his free speech. But they're trying to argue, well, we can't allow him to say anything religious because that would violate the Establishment Clause. And this is where hopefully the court's going to move the direction that they moved with us in Bladensburg, which is to say, that's not the way you interpret the Establishment. The Establishment Clause is not, we don't want there to be a national church. It's not, we're going to have the government shut down religion anywhere it sees it. You know, that's a hostility to religion. And again, I think this case is going to give us the opportunity to put the Establishment Clause in its proper context and push it back, and then open up religious freedom and protections and free speech protections on the other side. So it's kind of both religion clauses at the same time.
Didn't you also give a presentation to the Supreme Court on Tinker versus Des Moines? Because that was on the free speech ideas of students. So in some respects, this is parallel to something you talked about years ago.
It is. I think it'll be like the Tinker case, which is, 60 years old now and still a classic, one of the key cases, because this will be the first time. I mean, what do you do if you're a teacher and you're having issues with religious freedom, and let's say you're a school administrator and you don't know what you're supposed to do? There's not a lot of guidance. And so to be able to say, hey, there's a Supreme Court case that says I can't tell this teacher she can't bow her head over the lunch cafeteria.
Crazy.
I mean, the things that we see all the time, now there will be a decision in the Coach Kennedy case. So it's a great opportunity. It's also something I think everybody understands and the country can follow and watch and learn, that really be reminded that we're a country built on religious freedom. And hopefully we'll get a good decision that'll affirm that.
Let me just mention that we're going to a break, but we have a link to First Liberty. For those of you watching online, I might hold up my copy of FLI, which is the Insider, and there's some great material there as well. But I thought when we come back from the break, we've talked about two cases that you have before the Supreme Court. That's Coach Kennedy and, of course, the one out of Maine. I've heard there's now a third case, so we're going to go 3 for 3 here, and so that's going to be an opportunity to talk about that as well. Let me just mention that we do have quite a bit of information, and as soon as we finish that, Keisha has put together a very good piece that appeared in the Washington Times a while back, and we have posted it today. I think it's the third article, and we may talk about this because a lot of people are starting to say, as we do some research into Judge Jackson, we have a couple of questions. Hers has to do with the number of times that she has been reversed, which means that she deals with these issues very differently than everybody else in the Supreme Court. And if that's not enough, she tends to let certain individuals off or be more inclined to do so. So we're going to get into that as well. And then we'll get into some other topics, not the least of which is, if you look at our second article, we have the New York Times finally slap their heads and their foreheads saying, you know what, it's quite possible that laptop for Hunter Biden really did exist, and it really does talk about corruption. So we'll talk about that too, right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In the 21st century, warfare doesn't always happen on the battlefield. Cyber warfare is becoming an important tool for many countries. That is why we have been seeing warnings about cyber attacks against the West and the U.S. With U.S. sanctions being used against Russia, Professor Ryan Wright of the University of Virginia predicts that it's only a matter of time until the U.S. is targeted more directly. This may mean attacks on your personal device through ransomware, but also attacks on the infrastructure such as your internet access or even the power grid. We have seen such attacks in the past on solar winds and on the Colonial Pipeline. These were state-sponsored actors using increasingly sophisticated cyber warfare. Russia might try to disrupt financial systems and crucial infrastructure such as the power grid or oil production to put pressure on the U.S. to relent on sanctions. Dr. Amy Ziegart, who is with the Hoover Institution at Stanford, is the author of Spies, Lies, and Algorithms. In a recent conversation, she noted this paradox. She said in cyberspace, the most powerful countries, including the United States, are simultaneously the most vulnerable countries because we're so digitally connected. And that's especially true of democracies because of our freedom of speech, which enables the possibility of deception at scale. And of course, the good neighborhoods and the bad neighborhoods in cyberspace are all connected as we find out when our information is stolen or hacked. You know, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has been taking place more than 5,000 miles away. While the military battlefield is far away, a cyber attack could be as close as your computer and the cell phone. And I'm not sure we're ready for those attacks. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, feel free to give us a call. If not, sit back because we're going to be talking about a number of things having to do with the Supreme Court and also about a Supreme Court nominee, which we'll get to in just a minute. And Kelly Shackelford, Keisha Russell with us in studio, and you can watch it online or ask a question if you would like to do so. But Keisha, let me come to you because we've talked about the school choice case out of Maine, and I know especially our listeners up in Maine are familiar with that, and we have talked about that in the past. Kelly just educated us about Coach Kennedy. But there's a third one, and it has to do with the Navy SEALs.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Yeah, so First Liberty, we represent about 40 Navy SEALs who asked for a religious accommodation so they didn't have to take the COVID vaccine. Now, remember, these are some of the healthiest people on the planet, right? You know, so they've asked not to do this, and the government essentially told them no. And so we asked the court to give us an injunction. That just means to stop the... prevent the Department of Defense from punishing these Navy SEALs for asking for this religious accommodation. And we got it. You know, the court sided with us. And even though we won, the Department of Defense continues to punish these Navy SEALs. I mean, outrageously. We've got one who has a traumatic brain injury and was trying to seek some medical attention, and the government wouldn't let him off base. Still punishing him for having sought that accommodation. So it's really outrageous. At this point, the government has asked the Supreme Court to look into and opine on that decision that we got from, which was the Fifth Circuit, that agreed with us. So, you know, we're going to wait and see what happens, but the court hasn't taken the case yet. They've asked for some responses. And so we're just going to wait and see.
Yeah, I put this, it's at the top of my prayer list right now of all the cases and so I would really ask the point of view listeners to pray because the timing is so quick.
Yeah.
We won an injunction for these SEALs, and we won on the Court of Appeals too. So this is the highest level decision in the country. We won the first in the country, and now we won the highest level. This will end up impacting everybody, and we've got great judges. We had a great judge at the district court. We had a great 3-judge panel. You just get 3 at random out of 19. We got great. I mean, Edith Jones is a legend.
Yeah,
I mean, she is so well respected.
Yeah, divinely picked panel. Certainly.
Absolutely. And so the only thing that can mess this up now is if the Supreme Court were to grab the case and say, we're going to take and we're going to redo things. And there's a real temptation because, this argument of, well, you're conservative judges. You don't want to interfere with the military, which they don't generally, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the military can refuse to follow specific laws that were passed that apply to them.
Right.
Yes.
But, and look, when you get to the Supreme Court level, the Solicitor General's Office of the United States is the most professional, highly talented. These are some of the best lawyers at knowing how to argue at the Supreme Court. So they've got the best lawyers. We feel like we're up to it. But now there's going to be a lot of temptation. So they filed their brief. We filed our response, and they have now filed their reply. It happens very quickly because this is an emergency request to take the injunction away. And so what we need the court to do, this is an emergency. Most of these, they just say deny.
Right.
And that's what we need. We need them to say deny so that we can keep this victory and build this out, which it'll affect, 20,000 families in the military who are all being persecuted right now, having their pensions taken away, having their families threatened, told not to travel. As you heard, people with PTSD having their medical appointments canceled. This shouldn't happen, and we've got a great momentum, but we need to keep it. So I would really covet people's prayers for the SEALs case, and especially at the Supreme Court right now, because I know there's a lot of spiritual warfare going on over this.
One of the questions I got is you actually looked at the process by which they evaluate these individuals, and I think all of us called it a sham process. So then this became, a class action suit, didn't it?
We're on the way to doing that. Yeah, what happened is we uncovered that they were not, the law requires them to look at every person who asks for religious accommodation, to look at their circumstance, to look at each individual. And instead, we uncovered that it was a sham. They weren't doing that. They were pretending like they were doing that. They were issuing form letters. They had a 50-step process that was denial, like it was built in.
Oh, yeah. It was like the direction to read the request was like 35. It was like step 35 or something. It was outrageous.
And so what that meant is this is from the Navy, because these are Navy SEALs. But what that showed you is these were the procedures they were using for everyone in the Navy.
Wow.
So what that then had us do is we went back to the district court judge and said, this needs to be certified as a class to cover everybody in the Navy. And so that's the next step, too, is getting that. But we've got to make sure first that the Supreme Court doesn't take this, doesn't disrupt it, doesn't do something because they feel like they don't want to interfere. It's not interfering. It's protecting these people from having the law violated against them. You have a right to ask for a religious accommodation. The idea that the government, in this case the military, can punish people for asking for the law, the last thing you want is a military that thinks it doesn't have to follow the law. So this is a pretty simple circumstance. The great thing about this is all the commanders of these SEALs are supportive of them.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, this isn't coming from the commanders.
Yeah, we understand
this
that.
This is coming from Washington, D.C., from the politics. And so pray for the Supreme Court. This is a really important part of the litigation.
Let me just mention again, you can go to First Liberty. We've got some of those links there. There's a place where you can join the fight. And Keisha, I've said this to Kelly, but since you're not on all the time, we have a lot of people in the military listen to this program. And I can say that there are two things that seem to have really got our audience. One, Coach Kennedy, because everybody has a beloved coach, and they can't even believe that they're a coach that goes to the 50-yard line and prays by himself, that would be unconstitutional. But the other one gets our military, in which they say, look, I know Navy SEALs. These are the strongest, most incredibly resilient individuals. These are the best of the best. And then you're telling them they have to get some kind of like vaccine, and then you treat them like dirt, and then you even are saying that we're going to drum you out of the Navy SEALs and make you pay for that. This gets people pretty angry. And so there's a place where you can join the fight. And I would think that would be an opportunity. When people hear this, they say, what can I do? They can join with you, can't they?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to firstliberty.org and you can go there and read about the case, read everything that's going on, and help us, defend these Navy SEALs. This is not how you thank people who risk their lives and time with their family to defend the country.
So again, a lot of very important issues. Of course, I did a commentary yesterday based on Lathan Watts' piece. We're just reminding us about the Oregon bakers and about the Alaska Airlines flight attendants. And it seems like, how do you keep track of all these cases? I keep having trouble keeping track of all the cases.
And here we are talking about the military, and Keisha's working on one of the biggest military cases in the country too, with the Shields of Strength case, where they're trying to ban the dog tags that have scripture verses that people want to have in the military. So, I mean, that's just another case, right?
Yeah, just one of many amazing cases and clients that we get to defend that we're honored to do. So I think, Shields of Strength is really important, right? Because in that case, you've got this great company, a guy named Kenny Vaughn, who makes these replica dog tags with scripture on it and, some of the words and everything that define and categorize the branch of the Navy of the service member. And so you've got, say, a Navy girl, Navy mom, a Navy dad with a scripture or something that just is for the service member in particular. And the Department of Defense basically said you cannot put any department insignia with scripture or with religious expression at all, which is obviously a violation of the First Amendment, right? So we're honored to defend them, and we're excited about what's going to happen in this case.
Again, if you want to find that, firstliberty.org/shields. And that's all you need to know. It's one of the featured cases, and so we'll take a break. Okay, when we come back, we have a nominee to the Supreme Court. I have in front of me here the piece that Keisha put out earlier this month. It was in the Washington Times. Judge Jackson's reversal rate will be under fire at her SCOTUS confirmation hearings. So that's the first thing. So we'll talk about this whole issue of how in line her judicial opinions are and her judicial temperament is compared to the Supreme Court. And then we'll talk about a couple other issues that have now surfaced as well. So there are lots of issues to cover. And then we'll get into some other topics, but I just thought it would be appropriate to spend some time giving you a little bit of a look at this next nominee to the Supreme Court, which will replace Judge Breyer, but I would have to say replace is in quotes because she seems even more to the left of him, and I think you might not think that's possible. You'll figure that out after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again. Now we're going to focus some time and attention on this nominee to the Supreme Court, and there's a couple of reasons. First of all, very good article that came out earlier this month by Keisha Russell's in studio with us. It is in the Washington Times, and I would encourage you to get it, print it out, read it, because it, by the way, it'll take you about 5 pages to print out, so there's a lot of great material here. But Keisha, let me come to you, because one of those issues, and this is one of two that we're going to talk about, is the reversal rate. It might be good to explain that, because a lot of people say, well, do you have judicial temperament? Are you coming in to change the court, or are you there understanding the importance of precedent? But explain that, if you might.
Yeah, sure. So, Judge Jackson's been on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals only for about a year. But prior to that, she was on the district court for the D.C. Circuit for about And we found that the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals reversed her over 11% of the time, which is really high. So this is really notable because the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals is predominantly Democratic appointees. So that means she's got people who generally would share her ideology, still reversing her and saying that her view of the law is incorrect. I think a lot of Republicans are going to look at that and say that that's some indication that she participates in some judicial activism. That means that she's willing to, say, bend the law or ignore portions of the law because she's trying to get to a particular political outcome that's more favorable to her personal opinion and outlook.
You talk about the fact she wrote 500 orders, but since she's only been on the court a short time, she's authored only 2 written opinions. And sometimes it's hard to read the tea leaves, but what can we discern about her judicial philosophy? I'm sure everybody will not be shocked that she's liberal and very progressive, but what can we discern from some of the things that have come?
Well, one of the things you want from a conservative judge is someone who's going to look at the law and evaluate it as it's written. They're not going to look at it and try to bend it in order to get a particular position that they want, culturally, if they have some sort of ideology that doesn't match the law. And what we're seeing is that she has a tendency to bend the law in order to reach a position that she wants to reach rather than the one that the law would require under the facts and circumstances.
Well, and the thing that's interesting is, this large reversal rate that she had compared to all the other judges is really remarkable when you look at the fact that she's in the D.C. Circuit. So she's a Democrat, and the D.C. Circuit is overwhelmingly Democrat appointees, and yet she still was one of the most reversed. That really speaks pretty loudly as to there's something going on there. That's like either, why would somebody be reversed over and over and over again? One of two reasons. Either they're not very good at their job, or they have an agenda.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
And so either one of those are not great qualifications for the United States Supreme Court.
Right. And you want to assume, right, her background is pretty impeccable, right? She went to Harvard Law. She went to Harvard for both undergrad and law school. She's been a judge for about 8 years. So you want to assume that she can, evaluate the law properly. It's just she's choosing to, evaluate the law based on what she wants rather than what it requires.
Kelly, you know that oftentimes when you've been there when they've had oral arguments, there's almost a tendency just to write off 3 of the judges, because the liberal judges, because they come to a conclusion and then maybe come some justification for why they're there. And you've always tried to explain to people in the media that when we talk about conservative judges, they sometimes surprise us. In other words, they will look at the Constitution, and we mentioned the Smith decision, for example. You wouldn't have ever expected the conservative judge that made that possible to have ruled in that way, or other cases like that. And so the bottom line is the liberals are always predictable because they always have an agenda, but is even a little more fearful when she obviously seems to have more of an agenda than even the ones that have sat on the court.
Yeah, if she were to be on the court, I think she would clearly be the most radical left-wing justice. People say she would be like Sotomayor. Sotomayor tends to vote against everything that is sort of pro-God, those kinds of values. I mean, she's just always against on religious freedom, even if she's by herself. I mean, she was much more anti than, for instance, Ginsburg. So that tells you something about where she is. I think Judge Jackson is way to the left of Sotomayor.
Seems to me.
I mean, and this new story, I think, is an example.
Let's go to the
it.
second point then. You've got it right in front of you.
This is based upon facts. I mean, this isn't like an opinion. Is her track record on child porn and what she feels about people and how whether they should be let off more lightly. And so, and I'll just read for a little bit of this so people can understand. She has a track record of demonstrating extreme leniency towards child sex predators. Perhaps even more concerning is that she demonstrates an attempt to normalize a radical sexual ideology of adults being attracted to minors, categorizing it not as just criminal, but simply as being misunderstood. And so you say, well, okay, well, that's a lot. What do you mean? What is an example? Well, in law school, this goes back in law school where she advocated not having people register as sex offenders because he said it stigmatized them.
Yeah.
When she was at the U.S. Sentencing Commission, she advocated for eliminating mandatory minimum sentences for child porn. So not even to have a minimum. And now I'm going to quote from here. She said, because at least some people who possess child porn aren't sexually motivated, but simply, quote, in this for either the collection or the people who are loners and find status in their participation in the community. I mean, that's a disturbing comment. So that's while she's on the Sentencing Commission. And then she's had a case, like in one of her cases, somebody had 18 different images, multiple images of child pornography. And the sentencing guidelines said, 10 years, up to 10 years. She sentenced the perpetrator to 3 months. In another case, it was 102 child pornography videos and lewd pictures. And again, the sentencing guidelines said around 100 to 120 months. And she gave 71 months. So outside. So she's got this consistent approach that I think is very disturbing. And I think America would care about this. And what's funny is some of the Democrats have attacked, and Senator Hawley brought some of this out. And some of the senators attacked Hawley for this being beneath the dignity of the senators to attack. And I'm like, excuse me? After, going into, Kavanaugh, this is legit. This is her opinions, what she stated. This is not even in the same universe as what they did to Justice Thomas and of course Justice Kavanaugh with the ridiculous attacks on them and looking into their yearbooks and bringing salacious witnesses to try to say things. This is not like that at all. This is, what is her judicial philosophy? What has she done on the bench? What are these statements, these comments she's given in public? And I think most Americans would be very uncomfortable with a justice with these kinds of views.
I saw some of the original tweets by Senator Josh Hawley, who is the senator from Missouri. And even as I was reading through those, because it was kind of a long stream, I thought, if this was a nominee from a Republican president, that would be it. There would be an announcement the next day that we've decided to move on and look for another nominee. And so the fact is that now that the senators are attacking Josh Hawley, maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. But this is going back to temperament and the kind of ideas that would be promulgated in the court itself, right?
Yeah, and I think this is just the beginning. We know we know where she's coming from. This is a very radical ideology she has. You're going to see other things come out that are consistent with that. The American people are going to be very uncomfortable with. So we'll have to wait and see. But this all starts on Monday.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that want Keisha to testify. We might even see her up there,
Oh, that'd be good.
I think, a lot of the Republicans are saying, well, what's to be gained? It's going to be very difficult to tank a nominee like this, given, the numbers in the Senate right now. But at the very least, the Republicans have a duty to tell the American people who this justice would be. She's on the bench, what her philosophy is, what she cares about. And I think the Republicans need to take that very, very seriously.
I was around, since I'm the old guy around the table, when we talked about Judge Robert Bork, and we all said, no, they won't eliminate him. Of course, we had Hainsworth and Carswell and some of that back in the 70s, but, I was wrong. And it only takes a few things for people to say, maybe we need to move on, and that is certainly the case. So let's take a break. And by the way, I might just mention Penna Dexter's commentary you can hear right now if you're listening online. But I thought when we come back, before we get to Penna's piece, I thought it's about time now to talk about that Hunter Biden laptop. You know, the New York Times kind of changed their mind about this, and that gets back to the whole idea of media bias that we've talked about, social media censorship, and some of the other topics. And we have postponed that topic till today because I wanted to hear what Kelly and Keisha had to say about it. So we'll take a break, come back and talk about that right after this.
Bob Chapek, CEO of the Walt Disney Company, had a bad week recently. Unlike his predecessor, Robert Iger, he prefers to stay out of politics. What happened last week shows how difficult that can be in the current woke corporate environment. Disney's most famous property is in Florida, and Bob Chapek didn't mean to get in a public fight with the state's governor, Ron DeSantis, but it happened. Florida's legislators passed a popular bill that prohibits classroom instruction on sexuality and gender identity before 4th grade. Critics call this the Don't Say Gay bill and are pushing the false claim that the law would prevent children with same-sex parents from being allowed to draw pictures of their families or talk about them in class. The Parental Rights in Education bill is a common-sense pushback against the left's indoctrination in schools. One provision requires that schools notify parents and acquire their consent for children to receive health care services offered on campus. Another section prohibits school districts from requiring that teachers keep secrets from parents about health decisions, including matters involving gender identity. Governor DeSantis said in a video that companies that have made a fortune off being family-friendly should understand that parents of young kids do not want this injected into their kids' kindergarten classroom. They do not want their first graders to go and be told they can choose an opposite gender. By week's end, Bob Chapek was begging forgiveness from disgruntled Disney employees for not speaking out against the bill. He also announced that Disney would renounce all political giving and pledged to send $5 million to LGBT groups. Bob Chapek's original instincts to stay out of this debate were correct, and other CEOs should take notice. As Family Research Council's Tony Perkins wisely suggests, maybe the reality is finally starting to sink in that corporate America is on the wrong side of the political debate by being in the political debate at all. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's we can talk about media bias. Matter of fact, I'm holding up our little booklet on media bias, and one of the many examples we use is our friends at the Media Research Center after the 2020 election went and talked to a number of Biden voters in 7 swing states. Those would be the swing states of Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And they just checked on their voter knowledge, and they found that if these voters knew more about some of these news stories, they would have voted differently. As a matter of fact, they found that at least 1 in 6, or 17% of them, would have actually not voted for Joe Biden and might not have voted or might have voted for Donald Trump, which suggests that Donald Trump could have won every one of those elections. And one of the key ones was this issue of Hunter Biden's laptop. For those around the table, I know you're going to roll your eyes, but they found that nearly half, 45.1% of them, did not know about the Hunter Biden laptop. Now, there's a very good reason they didn't know about that, because as soon as that information came out from the New York Post, there was an attempt by social media to prevent that information from coming out. Well, 2 years later, we now have a 1,700-word news story by three of the top reporters who have been relating to the Justice Department investigation of President Biden's son. And first of all, they acknowledge it's not just a tax matter here. And second of all, if you wade through a number of paragraphs, you also learn that they do indeed believe that this comes from a cache of files that appear to have come from a laptop abandoned by Hunter Biden in a Delaware repair shop. So here we go, Kelly Shackelford.
Yeah, this is really sad. It's what's happened to the one thing that was making America great for many, many, many decades was that we had a free press that actually felt like they had a journalistic responsibility and had integrity. And I think nobody believes that anymore. You can't trust them. Why do the New York Times admit this at this point? Because they know what's going to come out is going to make them look foolish. So this is just a protection deal right here. They're finally admitting what was already true. But this is why it's so important. The things that we fight for at First Liberty is religious freedom, even for people who we disagree with their religion, right? For free speech, even for people who we don't agree with what they say. All the time I'll get calls from people saying, you're representing so-and-so. We know they're a Christian, but they've got some bad beliefs. And I'm like, I don't care. That's not my job. My job is to allow freedom. And this is what we've destroyed when it comes to the press. What happened on the social media especially was and I think everybody agrees it's wrong what's going on, but they're doing it and they're banning things, things that turn out to be totally true. And so we're seeing, we saw it in the pandemic, right? What was the first thing? It was only what the WHO approved. And, of course, the WHO flipped from one position to the other. So what was banned one time was allowed the next time. And so this is not how we do things in the United States of America. We allow the whole point of a free marketplace of ideas is that people get to speak their opinion, their version of the facts. And if we see everything, we can come to our own conclusions. When you start banning certain things, certain statements, certain people, we lose the free marketplace of ideas. We lose the best way to find out what the truth really is. And it's kind of like having a legal, the best thoughts I ever have about a case are when somebody on the other side is really good at pushing me. And I will go to new levels of my arguments where I will come up with things I hadn't thought of before that are really good. And that's how we get truth. It's kind of like making the coal into a diamond. And we blow that when we don't allow all sides. And this, to me, is what the New York Times debacle at this point shows. Everybody knew that was Hunter Biden's laptop. And what they did before the election was really, for a journalist, it's criminal.
Oh, yeah.
And they should, you really would, in the old days, you should just close shop. But unfortunately, right now, nobody believes any of the media because of this type of conduct.
I might just mention this article is one that actually is part of the memo from Byron York. He's been on the program with us before, and it is something that appears in the Washington Examiner. But Keisha, I want to come to you because even yesterday I was quoting from Lathan. He was talking about when you have a contrary idea, the best reaction is introspection. The proverb says, as iron sharpens iron, so as one man sharpens another.
Right.
And it does seem to me right now that instead of saying, well, if you think there's a bad idea, we need more ideas to counter them, they're saying, no, we'll just not even allow those ideas to be expressed at all.
Yeah, definitely. And I think This is a really good lesson, I think, for Christians, because we're responsible for the decisions we make and the opinions we hold, and we need to make sure that those opinions are based on fact. And you can't know those facts or base your opinions on facts if you're taking everything you're getting at face value. You really have to do your research if you want to make wise choices as a voter.
And again, I was just thinking, today's March 18th, but 2 days ago was March 16th, and 2 years before, on March 16th, 2020, we had 15 days to slow the spread. Kelly, remember that? And how did that turn out there?
Right.
Well, I do.
And all the things that we heard, that so many of them were untrue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm trying to remember. You might remember, Kerby. What was it that really early on the WHO said emphatically, and therefore they would not allow an opposite opinion on any of the social media, and then they changed into the pandemic? I don't know if it was mask. I think it might have been mask.
Mask was one of them.
Yeah.
But then there was the whole idea that vaccines will prevent you from spreading and getting COVID.
Yeah, and so, I mean, it just, look, that's not the way we learn things, by shutting out differing opinions. And it's certainly not a way to get to the truth. And it's certainly, this is one of the things I think that people, the media was already sullied, but now they've sullied medicine.
Right.
Because, and I think most people learned a lesson that I had already learned. I had to be in some debates, and I'd run across this casebook it was called The Philosophy of Science. And I was like, what is this? Oh, no, the Psychology of Science. And it started going through history and how all these great scientific discoveries, a lot of times when the person came up with it through the scientific method, when they released it into the community, they were attacked.
Yeah, Thomas Kuhn is what you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just
Nature Scientific
Smelthius on Listerine and the disinfectant. And you would hear these stories like the guy who, Smelthius, or I don't know how you pronounce his name, but everybody was doing surgery. They were doing
Semmelweis. That's it.
Yeah, Semmelweis.
Semmelweis. I haven't said it in a while.
He was doing these surgeries, and then they were going into childbirth, and everybody was dying.
Yes.
And one guy decided, well, why don't we disinfect? And they try at the hospital, and just massive lessening of deaths. And what's the result of this guy? He ended up in an insane asylum.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's because there's this dogma with scientists, and so to allow that to happen in the pandemic, and we saw it with a lot of doctors who had different opinions, right? And we're still seeing it now. This is very dangerous. I mean, it's one thing to politicize and ruin free speech and freedom of the press. That's bad enough. But when you do it with science, I mean, people's lives are in danger. And so we really need a recovery of the marketplace of ideas of what America is really all about. And it's being violated in a lot of different ways right now. Of course, that's what we do in court. We go in and fight for the First Amendment in our cases. And so the idea is, do you agree with the Navy SEALs who are objecting? I don't care. You shouldn't care. You should want freedom and not have the government punish people for having different ideas.
One of the things I love from your article is why religious freedom matters. It's the first defense against tyranny. That's the first thing to go. I want to talk a little bit more about this, but we have a mandatory break. Maybe even come back and talk about why did you go to Kentucky and deal with churches and all that kind of stuff. There's some really important principles here that we need to apply, but we need to take a break. And when we come back, we'll still have Kelly and Keisha with us, and I hope you'll be with us. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212.
How has Point of View shaped your point of view? For the last half-century, Point of View has brought light to the culture thanks to the partnership of listeners and supporters like you. That's right, it's been 50 years. To celebrate our 50-year anniversary, Point of View wants to hear from you. Has Point of View ever inspired you to take action? Do you feel your faith and Christian worldview have been strengthened by the program? If so, share your story with us. Email it to story@pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Point of View would be nothing without you. You are Point of View's legacy. Don't let that legacy be forgotten. Share your story today. Tell the next generation how Point of View impacted your life. Your testimony could even be featured on the program. Again, share it to story@pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Story@pointofview.net. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, if you'd like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Kelly Shackelford, Keisha Russell, and let me take a phone call here. We'll head out to Georgia, WLPE in Fran. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for taking my call. I was just thinking about what y'all said recently about Mr. Putin's religious factors in what he's doing, and with separation of church and state. I have great respect for the Russian Orthodox Church. I had a friend who was Russian Orthodox, but his desire to make all Ukrainian Orthodox folks and Baptist Ukrainians back to the Russian Orthodox, isn't this what separation of church and state is supposed to be versus what people in this country think it is now?
The framers were really concerned about the establishment of religion. They'd seen state churches and the rest. And in case you're wondering, I do have a commentary coming out next week, and we have talked about this because one individual said that Vladimir Putin says that he believes it's his spiritual destiny to rebuild Christendom by killing innocents. But anyway, that's the case. And the actual head of the Russian Orthodox Church, the patriarch, says, actually, Ukraine is not for us just a periphery of the church. We call Kiev, or now called Kiev, the mother of Russian cities. For us, Kiev is what Jerusalem is for many. And so this idea of enforcing and trying to then mandate everybody to be part of the Russian Orthodox Church. We had a time when some of the Ukrainian churches left the Russian Orthodox Church. As she mentioned, they're just the second largest group of Baptists in Europe are in Ukraine, and to then force all those to be Russian Orthodox, that's what the framers were concerned about, wasn't it, Kelly?
Absolutely. That's, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That's the First Amendment, the very beginning. Unfortunately, in our country, they perverted that under more liberal Supreme Courts, saying that meant all kinds of things that it never meant, that essentially we had to remove religion from public life, which is not what the founders meant at all. We are now getting that corrected. We've now got good justices and judges on the courts. We started it with the Bladensburg Cross case in removing the Lemon decision and some of the others. And I think we're moving in the right way, where we understand that we want religious people to participate in government. We want them to speak their minds. We want those different ideas. We just don't want there to be a nationally established church that everybody has to support. And so, God created different spheres. He created government. He created the family. He created the institution of the church. He didn't want the government to be the church. He didn't want the church to be, the federal government. So they each have their roles, and that's important. And so we don't want the idea that the government can take over and tell us what church we're supposed to be a part. And again, I don't think we have any worry about that in the United States at all.
Yeah, I think one of the things that some Christians worry about in terms of having religious freedom is what it allows other religions to do. But, as soon as you say that someone has to be Christian, in 5 minutes, the government's going to say, well, no, we've changed our mind. Now you have to be Muslim. Now you have to be a Satanist. Now you have to be an atheist, and so you've got to understand that religious freedom has to be available to everyone in order for it to be available for Christians.
Freedom for all is in freedom for you. And again, sometimes it's taken a while for Christians to understand that, but I have seen a little bit of an understanding now. Kelly, you've heard me say before that when we used to talk about the Equal Access Act and some of those cases, they'd say, well, if we have a Bible club in the high school, then we might have a Muslim club. And I go, yeah, or you might have an atheist club. But that's why we believe in freedom, because freedom for everyone then provides freedom for individuals, right?
Yeah, I remember when that started, the biggest objection was, well, there might be a Satanist club. And our response was, well, our kids would say, great, we'd love to know who they are so we can pray for them. Like 10 years later, I remember going back and checking, and there was like 30,000 Bible clubs as a result of this. And there weren't any Satan clubs. And so this is all kind of fear-mongering, right, to keep the good from happening. And that it's just a way to try to scare off. And we see this all the time with people who, Satanist groups or atheist groups or whatever, for trying to promote their whatever. And what they're trying to do is get you to shut down the open access of whatever it is that they're offering it for. It's not a very clever trick, but sometimes people want to go for that. That rather than hear things they disagree with, they would rather shut it down for everybody, which is a big mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most powerful thing about the truth is that you get to expose the lies, and you can't do that if you hide. And so if you have these clubs and you're able to see the differences in what the Christianity offers and what these other religions offer, you have an opportunity to really witness to people about the truth of Jesus Christ.
Very good. Let me just mention, we do have this little booklet on church state, and it just, again, helps you understand what Kelly was talking about, that, had this Thomas Jefferson wall of separation, and then Justice Hugo Black took that, I think, in the wrong direction. And Kelly, you said this may be the first time we've had really a constitutional court since the 1920s. Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's the first time since, in a long time, since we've had a majority of justices who think their job is to find the original meaning of the text. Now, that might sound, most people who aren't paying attention might go, well, of course that's what they're supposed to do, is to find the original meaning of the text. No, that's not what we've had. We've had a majority of justices who have believed that the Constitution is, quote, a living, breathing document, that it, quote, evolves. And so what they do is they think they're being good judges by adapting whatever is going on in society and what they think is right in the Constitution to those things. But we don't have that now. We've got people like Justice Thomas. Like, take it when the Texas law against homosexual sodomy reached the Supreme Court. What did Justice Thomas say? He said, well, I think it's a stupid law, but it's not my job to decide which laws are stupid or not. And he analyzed, what he's supposed to analyze, what the Constitution doesn't speak to this, et cetera. So that's what we want judges, that their job is to find the original meaning of the text, of the statute, of the Constitution. And we haven't had that. And so when you get that, it starts moving you back to all those founding principles that are placed in the Constitution. And so that's what we're seeing in religious freedom. We're seeing it in really every area. I think, we're going to see it on abortion because it's not in the Constitution. Mm-hmm. We're going to see it on the Second Amendment. There's a major case at the Supreme Court
on
that.
We haven't even mentioned that.
We're going to see it on school choice. Mm-hmm. We're going to see it on Coach Kennedy. We're going to see it over and over again. And so that's a really good thing, that we're being moved back to what the original text says and what the founders meant.
One thing I like about Neil Gorsuch is the fact that sometimes he also says, we're not going to do your job for you. You need to do your job.
That's exactly right.
And I've appreciated that, too. Justice Neil Gorsuch a couple of times just said, we're not going to answer this question because you write a bad law. Well, you need to go back and write it the right way.
Right.
And that's been a long time since we've seen something like that. So let's take a break. When we come back, I did want to get their thoughts around the table here. We are talking about 2 years ago. Can you believe this? March 16th, 2020. 15 days to slow the spread, and that was a justification for closing down churches. I want to get some comments about that, and then we'll move on to some other topics. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In the 21st century, warfare doesn't always happen on the battlefield. Cyber warfare is becoming an important tool for many countries. That is why we have been seeing warnings about cyber attacks against the West and the U.S. With U.S. sanctions being used against Russia, Professor Ryan Wright of the University of Virginia predicts that it's only a matter of time until the U.S. is targeted more directly. This may mean attacks on your personal device through ransomware, but also attacks on the infrastructure such as your internet access or even the power grid. We have seen such attacks in the past on solar winds and on the Colonial Pipeline. These were state-sponsored actors using increasingly sophisticated cyber warfare. Russia might try to disrupt financial systems and crucial infrastructure such as the power grid or oil production to put pressure on the U.S. to relent on sanctions. Dr. Amy Ziegart, who is with the Hoover Institution at Stanford, is the author of Spies, Lies, and Algorithms. In a recent conversation, she noted this paradox. She said in cyberspace, the most powerful countries, including the United States, are simultaneously the most vulnerable countries because we're so digitally connected. And that's especially true of democracies because of our freedom of speech, which enables the possibility of deception at scale. And of course, the good neighborhoods and the bad neighborhoods in cyberspace are all connected as we find out when our information is stolen or hacked. You know, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has been taking place more than 5,000 miles away. While the military battlefield is far away, a cyber attack could be as close as your computer and the cell phone. And I'm not sure we're ready for those attacks. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Friends started us off talking about this whole idea of the Establishment Clause, but before we forget something we mentioned in the last hour, we are talking about 2 years after 15 days to slow the spread. And Keisha, I'll come to you first, because when we look at this issue, it was used to justify closing down the churches. We now look in hindsight, almost in horror, of what was done under the justification of public health. And I know you've been involved with some churches that actually had to just fight for their First Amendment rights.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we represented a number of churches during that time. And, you know, we had some really creative leaders that came up with the idea to have drive-through church services, right? So the last time we checked, COVID doesn't spread from car to car. And so what happens when you give the government this much power, right? They continue to take more. And so we had, even in Kentucky, a leader who said, no, you still can't even have drive-in church services because that's dangerous somehow. And we were able to get the first decision for a church during COVID by getting a preliminary injunction and allowing this church to hold services on Easter Sunday, you know, in drive-ins. And, you know, we helped a number of churches in New York that way and all throughout the country. So it was actually an amazing time for religious freedom. We got some really amazing decisions and won every single case we filed.
Yeah, it was, there were a lot of nonsense going on, right? I mean, as Keisha said, you know, telling people that they couldn't drive into their church parking lot in their car. That's crazy. But I mean, you don't have to go that far, right? I mean, how many churches were being closed down and yet thousands of people coming in and out of Home Depot and Walmart was just fine.
Yeah.
But an hour on church, you know, on a Sunday with social distancing and masks, that wasn't okay. I mean, so we exposed that in every lawsuit and said, please explain this, and watch the attorneys for the governor's offices go above. And, and we won every one of the cases. The only downside is nothing ever made the Supreme Court as a merits case. So there's no precedent. Even those emergency motions that made the Supreme Court, we got good decisions. And by the way, we didn't get those until Amy Coney Barrett came onto the court. But those aren't considered precedent because they're motions. They're not really cases. So we're still in a flux. So we're going to have to deal with this again. Now, we've got great lower court decisions that we won, but nothing at the Supreme Court. But it just shows that we have to be vigilant about our freedoms, and that there will people who will take advantage of, quote, emergencies to, shut things down and use power in the ways that really were never intended. I think this is one of the major jobs that every legislature in the country should be going through right now, which is this emergency authority needs to be changed in your state.
I was going to talk about the application. Go talk about that.
It should be that the governor, if there is an emergency, and there are real emergencies, you should be able to take over for maybe 7 days. I mean, to me, at the most, maybe 14 days. And then, if the legislature doesn't meet and take action, it dissolves. Because the way our system was built was representative government for the legislature to represent you. That, there's a huge difference between a mayor or a county commissioner or a governor, coming up with an edict from his basement, and, the legislature, which might be 300 people who all represent all these people, having to bring this stuff out in open, have discussions. People will say, wait, there's a problem with that. Wait, people speaking and making arguments. And after you go through the process, you come up with something, then the governor signs it. That's very different. And one kind of government is really somewhat of a dictatorship. I mean, it's not totally, but it's very similar. The other is the American system. And we're going to lose the American system if we don't, have a better approach in these states. Because this was not a federal government thing, most of all. It's usually a state. The states were doing this, or the counties. The counties were doing it because the state let the counties do it. So this is really something that should be taken care of across the country in their legislatures. But I'm sure it'll be different in every state.
And you were talking about solutions because I wanted to get to that because, first of all, my joke has been that most people probably couldn't tell you who their county judge was, but after the pandemic, they probably can.
Yes.
And we've just had in the state of Texas our midterm elections, but all the other states listening today still have yet to have a midterm election. So they need to really find out who their county judge is. So the near-term solution is in the election. The long-term solution is to recognize that some of these emergency orders that just give unregulated power. We used to believe in checks and balances, Keisha. Yeah. We have that at the federal government. We have it at the states. But then all of a sudden we had, quote, an emergency. If you want to see how that can go out of hand, just look at what happened in Canada with the truckers, in which an emergency act that was implemented only to deal with terrorism actually then was applied to Canadian truckers. So we can learn some lessons from what's happening north of the United States, can't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a reason why we have separation of powers, right? I think every time I think about these issues, I think about the power of Christianity and how true everything is about the nature of man, and that the more power you give us, the more we want. Even the kings in the Bible that knew God and followed God, David and Solomon, they all had their issues as well. And I think it really demonstrates why it's necessary for us to separate powers and spread it out, because in the hands of one person, it will corrupt them and they will become a tyrant. That's just the nature.
Well, again, you reminded us, Kelly. I remember we used to talk about the fact, how is it that the marijuana dispensaries were open and the casinos were open? And,
yes.
And of course, our listeners in Nevada know the story of this one church that said, well, okay, if the casino is open, we'll just have church service in a casino. But I mean, it just got bizarre. And I don't think we're over this yet. I mean, there is a sense in which some of this kabuki dance and some of this mask mandate and some of the vaccine mandate still out there. And the issue is not even the vaccine anymore. The issue is religious liberty and our own freedom, right?
Well, absolutely. And this is why this was so important. We knew going into the pandemic that there was no precedent on this. And we knew how tempting it would be for a judge to say, you know, on one side I got a governor saying they got this order, they're trying to protect millions of people's lives. On the other side, we got a church that wants to open on a Sunday. So we really were trying to be careful about the cases we did, and we were able to get those victories. But people need to understand, like, as Marxism begins to try to really sort of seep into the country, the first thing that Marxism has to do is to remove religious freedom. You'll find, you look at history, look at the former Soviet Union, look at where communism comes in, and they kill the priests. That's the first thing they do. They have to get rid of the church because it's an opposing authority structure. Marxism is really an anti-God philosophy if you understand it very much, and it has a new nirvana which they think just occurs as soon as you have a revolution and have everybody kill each other. It's nonsense. A lot of it's really not very thoughtful, but the religious freedom is crucial for all your other freedoms and for our country being what it is.
Again, I'm holding up your piece here where you talk about when First Liberty intervened on behalf of On Fire Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky. It was a shot heard around the world. And I've got some people who want to talk to you, so let's, if we can, we'll go to Missouri. KTTK. Jeff, what's on your mind?
Hey, fellas, God bless you all. I just listen to you essentially every day, sometimes from the tractor, but almost every day, and just so thankful for what you all are doing, Kelly, and just the whole team. I graduated from college in 1978. I worked for a year in an immunology research lab during college, and then a year in a parasitology research lab, and I just can't even imagine if I hadn't followed the science in those research projects and had just dreamed up something or come up with a previous conclusion. And then in 1982, I graduated from medical school, so it'll be 40 years ago this year. And I really quit last year. Live out on the farm now, but the problem for me, I've never run away from hard things before. But I lost complete respect for the CDC and the NIH, who had always gone to for some, research and understanding things. And one of my last shifts, I worked in the emergency department. A nurse came and said there was somebody bleeding, and I needed to go. And long story short, it was a young lady dressed as a male that was bleeding. She was transitioning, and it was just a menstrual period. So, I've thought and prayed that I felt strongly that God had called me to medicine as a ministry. And there wasn't a day that went by that I didn't talk to people about the Lord and seeking His truth. And, the last year, I didn't even know what we were doing anymore. And it just breaks.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go, but I appreciate you sharing that, and I'm going to come back from the break. I want to talk about that. Follow the science. No, not anymore, because boys can be girls and girls can be boys, and a man can win all of the women's swimming medals, and I do want to hear some comments from Keisha about that. But we need to take a break. We'll be right back.
We live often overly plugged in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour we have in studio with us today, of course, Kelly Shackelford as well as Keisha Russell. And I might just mention we have a number of articles. In just a few minutes, we'll get to Penna Dexter's commentary, Disney versus Florida. Also, Larry O'Connor has one. The left has me scratching my head because it's all about this piece of legislation in the Florida legislature that was going to be actually signed and is going to be signed, or probably already has been signed by the governor, and the reaction of Disney. But I just thought that since Jeff a minute ago was talking not only about believing in the science, it's got to be difficult for a doctor because science says there's male or female. But now we're told, Keisha, that, oh, no, everybody has to be non-binary. And something which I know you have some strong and feelings about. When I have a man who now says I'm a woman actually destroys all the swimming records at the University of Pennsylvania. Talk about that, if you might.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea what it's like to feel like you're trapped in the wrong body, right? So I don't know what that experience is like, but I do know what it is to be a woman. And I know that there are a number of differences between men and women that just cannot be explained away. And unfortunately, we're in a place where we're not living according to reality or according to biology or according to truth, but we're living according to other people's feelings. And when we do that, you got to know you're going to run into trouble. I mean, when you look at this podium at the NCAA competition and you see these women who are standing as second and third to a biological man whose shoulders are almost double the size of these women, whose limbs are so much longer. I mean, how is this fair? How is this equity? How is this equality to erase the opportunity for another woman to have won first place and to take that away and give it to a biological male? There's nothing fair about that.
Well, again, Kelly, this is just the insanity that we find ourselves in every single day, it seems like.
Yep. And it goes back to something that we've talked about before and a guest you had, the book Live Not by Lies.
Right.
What do you do when this sort of Marxism craziness comes into the country? And you have to speak truth. And what Solzhenitsyn said in Live Not by Lies is all these totalitarian regimes exist because everybody goes along with the lies because they're scared they'll be punished if they don't. But if enough people, never a majority, just enough people will speak the truth is so powerful that it will collapse these systems. Well, this is a current day example of that. Every American knows what the difference is between a male and a female. Every American knows. They look at that podium. I challenge anybody, get a screenshot somewhere, Look at the podium of that swimming championship, and it's immediately clear how unfair what's going on is. But the question is, will anybody say it? Will anybody say the emperor has no clothes? Will anybody speak the truth? And we have to do that, even if it costs, I don't know the gal who got second who would have won, and I don't know if she said anything. She should.
Absolutely.
Okay? Her parents should. The family should. The school should. The third place should. Everybody should stand up and say, this is ridiculous.
Absolutely. The NCAA should not be allowing this.
No, but it's the only reason this is happening is because people aren't doing that, and they need to do it. And they need to call out the people, and they need to be so much so that they would become ashamed of themselves. But right now, everybody's living in fear of what I don't know. I mean, just of being ostracized or whatever. But I think you're going to find out very quickly that you're in the majority because people know truth and they know that there's a difference. And boy, this is just like an easy example, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is, you look at the picture. Just.
There's an ESPN post where they show the swim match, the last couple seconds. And if you look at the comments, the overwhelming majority of people are saying this is not fair at all to these women. I mean, and even people who are supportive of transgender rights, right? They're still saying this isn't fair. I mean, look at it. Objectively, you can see that this person is twice the size of these women that he's competing against.
Yep. And what this really does is it destroys, there was Title IX is a federal law that tried to make things more fair so that women's sports weren't excluded. Mm-hmm. They were able to participate. Of course, now I think this is the first year March Madness is actually able to be used for both women and men. So the women's championship this year is able to use the phrase March Madness for the first time. And there's a lot of things where they're trying to treat both tournaments the same. Well, there is no Title IX. There is no women's sports, women's anything if we don't know what a woman is anymore. If the men can come in and take over, if they feel psychologically, despite their biology, that they're now women, it destroys. So this is an example. This is what just happened with the University of Pennsylvania, but it also happened in track and field in Connecticut.
There you go.
I mean, when you have 19 state records that had been really accomplished by numerous young girls over a long period of time, wiped out in 1 year by 2 male transgender. Yeah, I mean that everybody knows that's just wrong. You're stealing from all these young girls who work so hard, or if they're older in college, they'd be young women. It's everybody knows it's wrong. The question is, I mean, this will keep happening if people don't speak up. But if people speak up, it'll stop.
Well, and again, we've said that one of the key words we always use around here is discernment, but the second one is the one you just talked about, courage.
Yes.
That's really what To Live Not by Lies. Rod Dreyer's got a new book coming out. So again, when that book comes out, maybe we'll talk with him about that again, and maybe even get Kelly on here. But courage is a big issue in terms of that. That's kind of a lead into the commentary people will hear in just a minute from Penna Dexter. And it's interesting because she's calls it Disney versus Florida. But if you're not familiar with what we're talking about, I have mentioned it, but not a lot. There's a bill that went through the legislature. It's called the Parental Rights in Education Bill, and it's an attempt to prevent indoctrination of lesbianism, transgenderism, and the rest. And it simply says that if you're in pre-K all the way up to the 4th grade, so we're talking about 4-year-olds to 9-year-olds, you can't talk about your sexuality and cannot indoctrinate kids in terms of their sexuality. And some people said, well, a lesbian woman or a transgender woman, a man or whatever, should be able to talk about that. No, not for somebody that's under the age of 10. And I just, again, it's the fact that the outrage, you say, and matter of fact, that's what Larry O'Connor says. He says, the left has me scratching my head because even if you think that we should educate them, can't we recognize that maybe there could be a range of innocence at least before we
they don't want that at all.
Not at all.
Yeah, I mean, as a teacher, I can tell you this is what the left is asking for right now is an exception, because even without this whole ideology, you're not supposed to be talking to children about sex. It's proven that it is not good for them. It's child abuse to bring in sexual language and thoughts and discussions in prepubescent children. That's factual. And so saying that because you want to talk about LGBTQ things, you should be able to talk to kids about it. That's an exception that should not be allowed. That's absolutely wrong.
You got to love Governor DeSantis because he says, these companies have made a fortune after being family friendly. He's talking about Disney, of course. Should understand that parents of young kids do not want this injected into their children's kindergarten classroom. They do not want their first graders to go and be told they can choose the opposite gender. And so a lot of this has to do with the fact that you had the CEO of Walt Disney who came and made a phone call that I actually thought that would be enough to simply to raise the issue with the governor. But Ron DeSantis is not your typical governor, is he?
No, he's not. And Disney's not going to close his theme park, right? Because at the end of the day, Disney is concerned about money, so they can say whatever they want to say.
Yes,
but he's saying it because of pressure from his employees.
That's right.
Who are all woke and are pushing this stuff. But what he probably understands, if not, Disney will suffer greatly, is that what his employees are pushing for is very much against the customers. The customers are looking for their young children to be protected and to be safe and to be able to, have some innocence. They're not wanting their, 5-year-old to be talked about human sexuality, okay? And they also don't want other people having those discussions with their kids. They want them. And that's the point that DeSantis was making is, all this does is let parents be the ones who are raising their kids until they get to a certain age when it's time to talk about those things.
If somebody went on to Disney World and started talking to young kids about sexuality,
that's right.
Do you think the Disney Corporation would have an action item on that? I think they would. Anyway, again, you just got to love the governor of the state of Florida, because in a very nice way, he told the CEO of Disney to go pound sand, is what he told him to say. And if you would like to know more about that, we're coming to a break, and that's when we play Penn and Dexter's commentary. So if you happen to be listening on a computer, you can listen to that. We come back, since we've been talking about all these issues, there's new polling that suggests that all these left-leaning policies are not good news for at least some of the people running for office. And I wanted to get Kelly's comments and Keisha's comments about that. And we'll also, once again, just talk about some of the ways in which you can be in prayer about some of these issues, because we started the program, if you just happen to join us, by talking about what's going on in the Supreme Court, and even talking about a nominee to the Supreme Court. So we've got some of that information on the website, and we'll be back right after this.
Bob Chapek, CEO of the Walt Disney Company, had a bad week recently. Unlike his predecessor, Robert Iger, he prefers to stay out of politics. What happened last week shows how difficult that can be in the current woke corporate environment. Disney's most famous property is in Florida, and Bob Chapek didn't mean to get in a public fight with the state's governor, Ron DeSantis, but it happened. Florida's legislators passed a popular bill that prohibits classroom instruction on sexuality and gender identity before 4th grade. Critics call this the Don't Say Gay bill and are pushing the false claim that the law would prevent children with same-sex parents from being allowed to draw pictures of their families or talk about them in class. The Parental Rights in Education bill is a common-sense pushback against the left's indoctrination in schools. One provision requires that schools notify parents and acquire their consent for children to receive health care services offered on campus. Another section prohibits school districts from requiring that teachers keep secrets from parents about health decisions, including matters involving gender identity. Governor DeSantis said in a video that companies that have made a fortune off being family-friendly should understand that parents of young kids do not want this injected into their kids' kindergarten classroom. They do not want their first graders to go and be told they can choose an opposite gender. By week's end, Bob Chapek was begging forgiveness from disgruntled Disney employees for not speaking out against the bill. He also announced that Disney would renounce all political giving and pledged to send $5 million to LGBT groups. Bob Chapek's original instincts to stay out of this debate were correct, and other CEOs should take notice. As Family Research Council's Tony Perkins wisely suggests, maybe the reality is finally starting to sink in that corporate America is on the wrong side of the political debate by being in the political debate at all. For Point of View, I'm Penn Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Take a few more minutes, but we have in studio with us today Kelly Shackelford and Keisha Russell. And this is a survey that came out just recently, and it was a poll of looking at voters in particular. And in light of some of the things we've been talking about, the promotion of everything from critical race theory, the promotion of transgenderism, the pushing of all sorts of issues, and of course then recognizing that some of the highest priorities are are still things like inflation. You would think that in these latest polls, Ukraine would be a big issue, and yet inflation is twice that. But here you have most of the voters, and Keisha, I thought I'd come to you for just a minute because they found that 61% of the voters that they talked to, and most of our listeners right now are in states that have yet to have a midterm election, 61% of them agree that Biden and Democrats are out of touch with hardworking Americans and have been so focused on catering to the far left of the party that they're ignoring Americans' day-to-day concerns, such as rising prices, combating violent crime. Those are not the numbers you want going into midterm elections, are they?
Yeah, definitely not. I think it shows that most Americans are looking at what's going on right now, and they think it's absolutely ridiculous, the priorities of the Democratic Party right now. And I think it would really behoove the Democrats to look at this and say maybe we need to shift our focus on some things that are going to be beneficial for Americans rather than for the elite left.
There's, there's a lot of issues, but I think three would rise to the top. What happened in Afghanistan was handled so poorly.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a refusal to even recognize that it was handled poorly. And people really lost a lot of confidence in the president at that point. What's happening at the border is everybody knows it's wrong. I mean, we're allowing millions of people across our border. We don't know who they are. And again, there's no reason for this. This is a really radical agenda. And so, and then add to that inflation, which is through the roof. Of course, everybody's paying way more than they've ever seen in gas, but it's happening with food. It's happening with everything. Now, I know they had this attempt to call it the Putin,
tax,
gas hike or gas. People aren't that stupid. They knew this was happening before the Putin thing upped it even more, and it's continuing to happen. And this hurts. This is not a Democrat Republican. This hurts, minorities, poor people. There's some recent studies that showed like 3/4 of the people that suffer the most are in those groups.
That's this piece too.
Yeah. And so because when your gas goes up $100 or $200 a month, and your food goes up, let's say $300, $400, whatever a month, there are a lot of people that don't like that, but they're okay. But the people we're talking about, that's serious. They can't pay that. They've now got to figure something out. And so I think you start adding all these things together. It's just sort of bad leadership after bad leadership. And by the way, there's something they can do about these things, right? I mean, the idea of what they're doing with oil and gas. And look, this is not a surprise. If you remember, he was caught saying how he wanted to end fossil fuel. Mm-hmm. This is all the philosophy. This is this really extreme climate change people that are denying drilling. They won't do the pipeline. There's all these things they've done. If they would open them up, we have the resources here. We could actually knock down at least the energy prices, but they won't do it. And so it shows this extreme sort of almost control by the most radical elements of the Democratic base that is destroying them. And they still, even to this point, they won't seem to turn and do the right thing on these things for the American people. I think it's going to really cost them when they get to the election.
Doubling down, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is the party that claims that they're trying to help the oppressed groups and the minorities and the poor, and everything that they're doing is impacting these populations negatively.
I talked the other day about the old famous G.K. Chesterton line about, don't take down a fence until you know why it was put up there. And I used the example in A Few Good Men, because if you ask people what's the famous line, A Few Good Men, they always say, well, you can't handle the truth. But it's the line after it that I think is relevant, because Colonel Nathan Jessup says, son, we live in a world that has walls, and those walls have to be guarded with men with guns. And I thought about, we're talking about walls like our southern border.
Yes.
We're talking about walls in terms of military, in terms of, hey, we really don't need to support NATO. I think we changed our mind on that one, didn't we? Oh, we can defund the police. I mean, just think about this. We have lived in this la-la land, and all of a sudden, The harsh reality is walls are important on our southern border. We have to have a strong military. And all of a sudden people said, maybe we need to start thinking about the military. If China goes into Taiwan, Russia's into Ukraine, and might go into NATO countries. And, maybe this idea of defund the police was a really bad idea.
Yep.
So there is a sense in which it's a wake-up call. And I think some of that's going to show up in these midterm elections, don't you think?
Oh, there's no doubt it's going to. I mean, I'm watching liberal comedians, I don't know if you've seen some of these, get on the stage and talk about how they wish Trump was back with regard to the military. They're saying that there's no way that Putin would have gone into Ukraine if Trump was president. I think everybody knows that's true. Whether you like Trump or not, they knew there's no telling what he would do if Putin tried it. And Putin would know, this guy's kind of crazy. He might do something, And so, it's weird when the liberal the liberal comedians are saying this and they're going after Biden. I mean, there's a popularity drop that's just unbelievable. So I think there's going to be a lot more. Now, this is traditional anyway. There's usually traditionally much more energy in the party out of power in the midterm elections.
True. Yes.
But I think in this case, it's not just going to be the party out of power. It's going to be the party in power going out to send a message as well to say, I'm looking at my gasoline. I'm looking at my food. I'm having trouble. I mean, it reminds me of a friend who was at the gas station not too long ago when he saw a son get out to put the gas in the car. And the son turned to the mom and said, how much can we do? How much gas can we put in our tank? She couldn't even fill up the tank. So this is affecting people at the real gut level, and that's going to show up when people go to vote.
If you're on fixed income, middle income, low income, you spend a lot for food and for transportation, heat, energy, and then shelter, and there's just not any flexibility there at all. So We'll see how that plays out. Just before we go, though, let's one more time talk about what's available at First Liberty. If people want to know how to pray, don't you have a newsletter that's available?
We do. The first thing I would tell everybody to get if they don't get it is when you go to firstliberty.org, which I know is at pointofview.net as well, but firstliberty.org, look at, it says The Insider. It's down just a little bit on the front page. You can get an email every week on what's happening, because otherwise you won't know what's happening. And I think this week we had an article about Judge Jackson. We had, anyway, there's great articles every week on the big cases, the big things, and that way they can keep in touch. They can pray about the things they see. There's also a prayer team. And I would really covet people's prayers for the Navy SEALs case, which is sitting at the Supreme Court as we speak, and for the Coach Kennedy case, which we will be arguing April 25th, because it'll affect so many people across the country, every teacher, every coach, and really everybody who works for government and their religious freedoms.
Again, if you scroll all the way down, left-hand side has things like Coach Kennedy, Sweet Cakes with Melissa, Shields of Faith, some of those. Right-hand side, FLI Insider. And then, of course, you also have that at firstliberty.org. And then you also have another place where people can watch some of the videos, right?
Yes, firstlibertylive.com.
Right.
They can watch interviews and things that we've done. But firstliberty.org is the main website with all the other stuff.
Well, Keisha, keep us up to date on what's going on with Judge Jackson and Kelly. Just great to have you both in here. First of all, I want to thank Doug for sitting in all week, because we have not had our engineer here, and we might be praying for Andrew. And we also, of course, have Ivy with us today because Steve is in another country, but we'll see him back here as well. So again, thank you both for sitting in. That's all we have for today here on Point of View. We look forward to seeing you on Monday right here on Point of View.
How has Point of View shaped your point of view? For the last half-century, Point of View has brought light to the culture thanks to the partnership of listeners and supporters like you. That's right, it's been 50 years. To celebrate our 50-year anniversary, Point of View wants to hear from you. Has Point of View ever inspired you to take action? Do you feel your faith and Christian worldview have been strengthened by the program? If so, share your story with us. Email it to story@pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Point of View would be nothing without you. You are Point of View's legacy. Don't let that legacy be forgotten. Share your story today. Tell the next generation how Point of View impacted your life. Your testimony could even be featured on the program. Again, share it to story@pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Story@pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.